Hello and welcome to the morebusiness.com podcast. My name is Raj Khera, your host, and my goal is to help 250 entrepreneurs become millionaires within 5 years of starting their business. Think big and big things will happen. In this episode, we will uncover how to overcome the 3 fears that are preventing you from achieving your greatness. This topic is real. You probably see countless others showing the success that they're achieving on social media. Now, it's unclear how much of that is real and how much of that is hype. But one thing that is clear, it's very clear, is that all of us have fears. And some of these fears act on us unconsciously. So how do you know when you're reacting to an emotion that's preventing you from progress? And how do you overcome that? Joining me today is Nancy Belmont. She's an expert on branding and a certified life coach. And by the end of our conversation, you'll be able to recognize behaviors that could be holding you back and unlock that potential that you've got that is just pushing to get out. Thanks for joining us today. So welcome, Nancy Belmont. How are you, Nancy?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Very good. Nancy and I have known each other for a long time. We used to be in the same professional coaching group together, an organization called Vistage. And that's where we met and have a lot of things in common. Nancy's done a great job growing her brand, her businesses. And so I'm excited to have her on this conversation because she's actually helping a lot of people break through self-inflicted barriers that they put up. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, as to how to identify some of these and then overcome them. So Nancy, quick introduction about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Nancy Belmont, and I like to say that I promote human flourishing. How I do that?
I love that. Oh, that is
Thank
so
you.
fantastic. So,
Well, I'm a brander, so I do that in a number of ways through coaching, facilitating organizational culture and brand conversations, public art, all ages picture books, yoga,
yeah.
Reiki. I do all sorts of different things to accomplish that
for
mission.
those of the, as people listen, you've actually worked on some pretty major projects. The U.S. Capitol. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, my company did the brand for the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center. So if you ever go to the Capitol now, you have to pass through the Visitor Center, and you'll see the logo that we made and the brand elements, and a lot of the brochures and things are what my company created.
Yeah. So Nancy knows a lot about branding. And so that's why I'm excited to have her here, especially, in light of people trying to create a personal brand. I know a lot of life coaches, business coaches, people who are independent consultants need to make their brand known, need to make themselves known. So let's get started with the conversation, Nancy. So first, let's maybe talk just one quick step. How did you get involved in doing personal branding? Because you have a nice journey to share with people.
Yeah, I was running a branding company for a number of years. It's been 22 years now. And I started to think about what I wanted to recreate myself into. And an employee who was leaving said, I think you should go to coaching school and get your coaching certificate. And I had never thought about that. But she said, the thing that you love most is working with leaders and helping them really figure out who they are and what they stand for and how they want to show up in the world. And I researched coaching programs. I found the one that I think you should go to. It's the best one, Georgetown Leadership Coaching. And I signed up and I was accepted, and that started my coaching journey.
And you are a certified
leadership coach.
Certified leadership coach. So I know people who may be listening to this discussion are also looking to pursue careers and get clients inside that realm. So let's talk about, the real topic at hand is a lot of times success is not just something that just magically happens. It starts with what's in your mind, what's in your mindset. And that's actually what life coaches help you get through. And sometimes as a life coach yourself, you have to break through a barrier, right? So what does that journey look like to really get past some of the self-limiting beliefs? You mentioned there's stages of this.
Yeah, well, there are lots of frameworks that I like to use. One is the stages of adult development. I don't think you and I have talked about that before, but it helps you understand how you can learn and grow and expand your point of view as a leader and as a human being. So that one's really interesting. The one that I use a lot is based in the leadership circle, and that's a 360 assessment, which means that your boss's boss, your peers and direct reports, and yourself takes this assessment and gives you some sort of feedback. And what the assessment does, and why I like this one, is it measures 18 competencies of leadership. And then it measures the 3 core fears that hold us back from our greatness. And those 3 core fears, I do a lot of public speaking around this topic. And what I find is that people really resonate with one or more of those core fears. And once you can get down to the bottom of what is it that is really holding me back, then you can start to work on what your self-talk is and how your energy is when you're doing certain things that scare you.
Let's go into those 3 fears. What are they? What's the first one? Let's talk through them.
Yeah, well, I just want to really credit Bob Anderson and Bill Adams, who are the creators of this framework. So they've got a book called Mastering Leadership that you might want to check out. But the 3 core fears are: 1, the fear of not being liked.
Not being liked.
2, not being liked. 2, the fear of losing control.
Losing control.
And 3, the fear of not being right.
Not being right. So we've got not being liked, losing control, and not being right. Okay. I mean, It sounds logical, right? But internalizing this might take some self-development, right? So So let's talk through that. The first one.
So the fear of not being liked. Now, there are good things that come with this fear of not being liked. Like if you're in an office setting, you're probably the person who is organizing the happy hours and is nice to everyone, and people like to come out and hang out with you. And so you're building culture and, fun in the office. But when you get to a leadership role, or when you're doing other things that are really kind of scary in life, then it can be really hard for you to make decisions. So you may have worked with somebody who has this fear of not being liked, and they can flip-flop on decisions. They can seem a little two-faced, like I'm going to tell you, oh, I really like that idea, and then I'm going to tell someone else, I really didn't like that idea. And so those are the problems when we get into a leadership role, where we need to be able to follow through on a strategic direction. We need to be able to make decisions. We need to be able to make decisions even that aren't popular if they are in line with our core belief system. So that's when it gets in the way.
Yeah.
And if you I like to think about public speaking. They say that's one of the number 1 fears. Public speaking isn't a fear of speaking in public. It's a fear of not being liked because people aren't going to like me. It's a fear of not being right because somebody's going to challenge what I'm saying and I'm going to be exposed as wrong. Or it's a fear of losing control. Like I'm going to lose control of the audience or lose control of myself. And I don't know what's going to happen when I'm up there on the podium. So there's something deeper. These are 3 really core fears that exist in all of us.
The fear of not being liked is pretty deep, because when you think about it, especially if, let's say you're a peer in an organization and you get a promotion and now you're leading the peers, your former peers. As a peer, maybe you want to be liked, and as a manager, you want to be liked, but sometimes you got to make some tough calls which make you unpopular. And so how can people recognize when they're holding back on decisions? I mean, they might know it in their gut, but to exercise that, how do they,
I think the first thing is just maybe this will help trigger to notice. So the first step is noticing that you're doing it, because most of these things are subconscious. We procrastinate on making a decision and we don't say, oh, it's because I'm afraid I'm not going to be liked. We just say, oh, I've got other things I've got to do. So just start noticing when you procrastinate making a decision or when you start flip-flopping, and tag it to that fear of not being liked. And then you're able to say, okay, well, what if not everybody likes this decision? What are the consequences of that? And then you can really take yourself down to, well, what would be the worst case scenario? And the worst case usually isn't as bad as your subconscious is thinking it's going to be. So if you can think that through in your conscious mind, you're able to have more control over your thoughts and make choices that might be different than what you've made in the past.
It's interesting you say that because I think one of the other fears, not just public speaking, but it's watching yourself on video and listening to yourself. I mean, I know we're recording this right now. I remember when I first started doing videos, I was looking at myself, I was like, oh my gosh, I sound like that. Oh, I'm so boring. Oh, nobody's going to like this. And I look back at my earlier videos, and yes, I absolutely was very like monotone in my speak and everything. And so I learned actually by just trying it and see what happens. And I know a lot of people, especially when it comes to personal branding, for other life coaches, they're looking at ways to get the word out, and sometimes they hesitate in just like putting themselves out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found, and especially I hear this when I go to networking events. So I post on LinkedIn very regularly about business coaching tips, business tips, insights, because that's my background. And some of them land completely flat, but some of them really resonate. And I'll run into people, and they like the ones where I'm the most vulnerable, the ones where I tell the stories, where I admit my mistakes, show them my warts, and here I am. And that's actually what resonates with people. I guess it makes you more human. And so yeah, getting past that fear of needing to be liked is pretty big.
Well, Bill Adams told me when I was do these big public art projects, and I was saying, these are really resonating with people, but I think it's just because there's something deep inside that I'm working on related to the project, and I'm sharing that with folks. And he said, the deeply personal is universal. So the more deeply personal we can get about what's happening inside of us, the more people can identify with it, and we can help them.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a life coach, just to develop your personal brand, don't worry about not being liked. Just be genuine.
Be authentic. Absolutely. Be courageously authentic.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned your large art projects, and I remember seeing posts that you had shared of the big wall that you'd put in Alexandria, Virginia, where people could just randomly come up and write something deep inside them, very anonymously. What were some of the things people shared?
Yeah, so the project was called The Courage Wall. And the prompt was, I wish I had the courage to, ... And so people wrote funny things like try mayonnaise, to accept myself, show my fiance my apartment. There was a hoarder who was engaged and was afraid to bring his fiance back to see his apartment, to admit when I'm wrong, to try something new, to say yes, to say no, to let go. So there were just so many things that people wrote.
Yeah. And it's really nice that it kind of allowed people to just kind of open up, because sometimes letting that out is a little bit of a release. It's like a little pressure valve, and you feel better that it's out. And
It is.
Yeah.
I had a couple come to me the year later, and they said, we wrote on the courage wall, I wish I had the courage to start a family. And here's our baby.
Oh, wow.
They said that
terrific.
Conversation started a dialogue between them about, what are we waiting for? This is something we really want. And they started trying, and they had a baby next year.
All right, let's go to topic 2 in overcoming fear.
Yep. So I switched them around how I normally talk about them. So we'll go to the fear of not being right.
Okay.
So what that can look like, if you have a fear of not being right, you can become arrogant in meetings. Let's say that you and I are talking and you disagree with me, and I have this fear of not being right. I can either get really arrogant and say, well, you don't know what you're talking about, Raj, or I can really distance myself, and even to the point of walking out of the room. So if you have somebody in your life, or if you've worked with somebody, or maybe this is you, that whenever you're pressed against, you distance yourself, you close off, or you start to attack, it might be that you have this fear of not being right. Because maybe throughout your whole life, you've been that person that, oh, well, ask Nancy, she knows the answer. And so that becomes part of your identity. And when that part of your identity is threatened, it's like an existential threat to your ego, right? And so it's very scary.
When you say that, like the fear of not being right, it's interesting because I think when you're younger, I suppose it depends on how you're brought up, but sometimes, people are even arrogant when they're a little bit younger. But I've found usually when you're younger, you're a little bit more open and receptive. And I've found that people that are older, I mean, I've built a number of companies and I feel like I'm still learning. And I talk to people who've not really done that and they seem to think they know a lot more. And I'm just like, sometimes I wonder, like, wow, oh, are you closing yourself off to really learning? And so, I mean, I try to read every day, and it's just, like the past is the past. Whatever you did in the past is fine, but like going forward, I don't want to always feel like, oh yeah, I know this is the right way to do stuff. I actually learn a lot from the younger generation. Perhaps you do too, just watching our kids,
Hmm.
that's a big thing. Um, and not thinking that I know how to do marketing on TikTok, for example, because my kids are the ones that watch it and I'm looking at their behavior and I'm like, oh wow, that's a very interesting way of consuming information. So I'm trying to like learn, and I get people talking to me around that, well, how do you do this, how do you do that? I was like, honestly, I don't know, I'm figuring this out too.
Yeah.
And so being okay with not being right all the time, I think it also shows a little bit of vulnerability,
Hmm.
which makes you a little bit more identifiable with people, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I talked about the stages of adult development a little earlier. Excuse me, expert is one of those stages where people can get, I don't want to say stuck, because there's nothing wrong with being in an expert stage where
Mhm.
you are valued for what you know.
Yeah.
If you want to move beyond that in terms of adult development, then you get into the stage called achiever. And that stage is you're really looking to get feedback from other people because you understand that you've got blind spots. And so, and that's kind of the top of the conventional stages. And then you go into these post-conventional stages where you're really able to open up and see beyond what probably 85% of the people can see in terms of leadership in life and how the world works and the
Hmm.
complexities and nuances
Yeah.
of life.
Yeah. It's interesting when you look at like how you learn and how you know that you're not always right. If you look at Bill Gates, my gosh, he's such an avid reader, and he like
Hmm.
on his posts he'll share what he's reading and what he's learning. I just find that so fascinating. I mean, like one of the richest guys in the world, would have been the richest if he hadn't donated all the others,
Right.
but so it's yeah, I like that constant learning thing, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
we can never always be right all the time.
Yep.
But to your point, yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're an expert, you're an expert. You've done stuff. But the other day I had someone ask me if I was an expert in XYZ, and I've got a lot of experience in whatever this particular topic was. But I wouldn't rate myself a five. I just can't go all the way to the 5-star rating just because I feel like, man, there's always something else I can learn. There's always
Yep.
something else, right? So that's
Yeah,
one
it's a
thing.
great mindset. And I think, it's easy for people who have this fear of not being right to learn from books, but it's a little harder when you're in a work environment and you're being challenged face to face.
Yeah.
So, just notice. I like to give somatic cues. So notice in your body if your blood starts to boil and your face starts to get hot and you start sweating, like
Hmm.
usually that means that you feel threatened.
Hmm.
And so then ask yourself in that moment, what is making me feel threatened? And if it is, I'm afraid that this person thinks I'm not right, and so therefore they're not going to value my opinion. Therefore, you know, I mean, the way that the mind works, especially the subconscious mind, is they're not going to value my opinion. I'm going to get demoted or fired. I'm going to be out on the streets looking for a job. I'm going to have to sell my house. Like it gets into this like cyclical tornado of doom and gloom. And
Hmm.
so when you can notice that, okay, my mind is going somewhere really badly just because the person said, are you sure that was on page 23? I think I saw it on page 21. Then,
Hmm.
you can really start to work with yourself and be the person that you want to be as a leader to anyone who's challenging you.
So, as a business owner, oftentimes your staff will just look up to you and say, well, what's the right decision here? And, you and I both know when you're starting a business, when you're running a business, you are making decisions based on incomplete information. And so what you think might be the right solution, right answer, right direction, turns out it may not be. And so, so what are your recommendations on how you convey that to your team so that you continue to look like a strong leader, which I think people want to work for strong leaders. They don't want to work for someone they perceive as a weak leader. They'll leave the company. And so, what are your recommendations for how you can convey the message that I think this is the right way based on my gut or my data,
Hmm.
but I may be wrong.
I think just being honest and saying something like that is great. I think if you can communicate how you came to that decision, and for many of us, if it's intuition, it's based on really our value set, our personal value set. So if it's like, you know, I I'm going to go with this decision, even though there's a 50-50 chance it may or may not be right. But I'm doing that because I believe in community, and community is really important to me. And if we went the other way, it would be violating that personal value of mine. So we're not going to do that.
Mm,
And then it at least gives people some grounding to understand why we're going in a certain direction.
yeah, yeah. And I think your point about like, okay, if you've got a gut feeling about something, explain why. I know I had a situation, actually a couple of situations, and one of them was when I sold one of my companies. I knew it was the right decision because I saw consolidation happening in the niche that we were in. And I
Hmm.
knew that for us to really compete head to head with some of the bigger players that were getting very well, funded, huge marketing campaigns, that we would have to go out and raise a lot of money, and just it would involve changing my lifestyle. It would involve changing a lot of things about the company. And so, but there was a market for people buying companies like mine. And so I
Hmm.
chose to go that route. And I think there were like some team members really didn't want to go that route because they felt that we could go there.
Hmm.
And so we had that little bit of back and forth. Ultimately made the decision to exit out of the company. And I look back and I think it was absolutely the right decision to make. But it was based on a gut, well, it was sort of based on gut, but a little bit backed by data because I could see what was happening in the industry. But
Hmm.
I would say it was more gut than anything else.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I don't know that I did a great job explaining that that's what it was. So,
Yeah.
you know, bad on me for that. But I think that your point about that, explaining why your intuition is taking you in one direction, is important.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, and people like people who can make decisions. Even if it's unpopular. If they're,
Yeah.
I've coached some leaders who find making a decision and sticking with it very hard. And so I would go in to coach them one week, and they'd say, I'm going to make this decision. And they communicated that to their staff. And then the next week, they would say, actually, I took that back. And then I had to tell everybody that we weren't going to do that. And then the next week, they would make another decision. That it was just always this flip flopping.
Mm,
So I think, people respect when you can make a decision, even if it's wrong, acknowledge the mistake if it was a
yeah.
mistake, and
Yeah.
then just move forward. And consistency around values is really important for people so that they can kind of predict you're not this erratic person who's just like making decisions willy-nilly. But if they know your values, and they can see that your decisions are grounded in your values, I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, I know there was one executive that I'd worked with in a coaching capacity that just had to be right all the time.
Mm.
And that's actually really hard to coach somebody like that because they I don't know why they get this opinion that they think they really just know this is the right path, and you can sort of see that it's actually not the right path. But sharing, hey, what do you really want to go in that direction? I know you've probably encountered people like that as well. I know life coaches encounter uncoachable people all the time. Um, what do you say to somebody like that? I mean, I can share my thoughts. I'm curious on
I
yours.
I would call it out and say it seems like you have a need to be right all the time. What do you think about that? And then they're like, "Oh
Yeah.
man!"
Yeah.
And where does that come from?
Yeah.
Were your parents like that, or what fear do you have if you're
Mhm.
not right? What
Yeah.
would come up for you if you made a wrong decision, or if you
I
said
like
something
that
wrong?
line, Nancy. What fear do you have if you are not right? I mean, that's
Hmm.
a really good discussion point, right? If you're trying to coach somebody and just ask them that, it's a soft way, but it's a little bit of a direct way also of
Hmm.
trying to get that point across. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the third fear to really achieve greatness that you have to overcome. Let's talk about that one.
Yeah. So the fear of losing control. So a lot of people I've found in the DC area, actually, this is a really popular one. And it shows up as a lack of balance in, work-life balance. And so people are working all the time and they might have this subconscious thought that if I take vacation, they've got imposter syndrome and I'm going to be found out and they're going to find the skeleton that I've tucked away in my drawer that I haven't dealt with, and then I'm going to be fired. Or it could look like perfectionism, which makes it very hard for anybody who is a subordinate to you to be mentored and developed. Because imagine if I say, I'm going to give this person a new role and I want to mentor and develop them, but then they do it their own way, and you're seeing that they're not doing it exactly how you would do it, or it's not perfect, then you
Mhm.
may take that back from them and say, you know what, let me get this one. I'll give you a different project that you can do another time. And then you take it and you do it your perfect little way. And they've just been demoralized
Mm,
because you've proven that they can't um, live up to your standards. The
yeah.
other thing that people don't necessarily have when they have this fear of losing control is um, they don't foster team play. And by that, I don't necessarily mean like, oh, we've got to play ping pong, but it's like valuing the unique thing that everyone brings to the table to make the team a really diverse and well functioning unit.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've seen in executive coaching sessions is that you really need to teach your leaders how to coach. I find that
Mm-hmm.
leaders coach, whereas managers just kind of like manage tasks,
Tell. Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of it. I don't really see any other way around it. You've got to be really forthright and show people that your voice isn't always the voice that's right. There's other voices, and help them find their voice and enable them to go forward too. So yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
coaching is really rewarding, because I always learn something about myself when I'm coaching someone else. If you get into those really deep questions where you're drilling down into their most
yeah,
vulnerable place,
yeah.
you're getting such a great understanding of them, but also a deeper understanding of you, which
Mhm.
allows you to work together much, much better.
So growth comes from discomfort. It really does, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even like when you go to the gym and you're in pain, you're actually growing, right? The
Yep.
muscles are working, and so that's the same with your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you're in that uncomfortable zone. And you and I have been inside our group coaching sessions where there has been a lot of very vulnerable conversations, all done in the
Yep.
cone of silence, that only the group members share. But that has really brought, I think, a lot of us in our group that we were in very close.
Yep.
And sometimes, you shed tears and you just have those discussions. But how do you feel at the end of that session? You feel like, okay, there's light, and I can grow from that experience. And so that's actually, as a coach, what you want to enable your clients to really experience too. I mean, I don't know that everybody goes into life coaching for the money. I think it's because you have a calling, really, and
Right.
you want to help people. So yeah, very
Right.
important.
There's such, I always left those sessions feeling very empowered because
Yeah.
the way that I saw myself was very different than the way other people saw me. And when they told me how they saw me showing up, um, it was surprising. And it made me feel much more powerful, which is really great.
Yeah, and if I can share one of those comments, I think this is fair. This is okay to share. There's one comment about you in one of those sessions. It was related to the movies. There's something about Mary. Do you remember that movie? It's an older movie,
I
and we're
do.
like, there's something about Nancy. There's just something. I don't know what it is, but you can't. But there's something about Nancy. It's very. A lot of people are very drawn to you, and I think that's a testament to your character. So
Thank
Nancy,
you.
thank you for sharing these three fears that hopefully the people listening today will be able to use and identify either in their own lives to overcome or in their clients' lives if they're providing coaching services to help them overcome. How can people
Absolutely.
get a hold of you, Nancy?
Yeah, easiest way is probably just email. So Nancy@vessence.com. It's Vessence. Or you can find me on social media on Facebook or Instagram at Nancy Belmont We Live Big,
Yeah.
and on LinkedIn as well.
All right. Very good.
Yep.
Thanks so much, Nancy. It was a great conversation. Take
Thank
care.
you. So
All right.
great. I really appreciate it, Raj.
Thanks. And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining me today on the morebusiness.com podcast. Till next time, spread your knowledge, share your love.